Hello, everyone, and welcome to Learning to Let Go, Fostering Independence, the latest in a series of webinars for individuals, families, and caregivers affected by hemophilia A and B and inhibitors. These activities are designed to enhance and expand on the education provided at the National Hemophilia Foundation's Inhibitor Education Summits. This webinar series is supported by an educational grant from Novo Nordisk. Our presenter this evening is Ed Kubler, a social worker with the University of Texas Gulf States Hemophilia and Thrombophilia Center in Houston for more than 17 years. Ed has co-directed the Texas Summer Camp Leadership Program for males with bleeding disorders for 23 years. He is also co-director of the center's annual educational retreat for women with bleeding and clotting disorders. In addition, Ed facilitates numerous national and international empowerment trainings for teens and young men with bleeding disorders. Also joining us tonight are three panelists: Kalik Chow Kodu, Ore Medrano, and Karen Bishop. Kalik is a high school freshman from Brooklyn, New York. Jorge is a college junior living in Reno, Nevada. Kalik and Jorge both have severe hemophilia A, and their inhibitors are tolerized. Our third panelist, Karen, lives in Findlay, Ohio. Her son, Michael, is a college senior with severe hemophilia B and an active inhibitor. Welcome to our panelists. Our program will conclude with a question and answer segment. To ask a question, go to the area in the far lower left of your webinar screen. Type your question in the field just to the left of the send button, which is located in the pod or area labeled chat. Click the send button when you have finished typing your question. However, please note that your question will be addressed during the question and answer session at the end of the presentation. There are no handouts for this presentation. However, a recording of this webinar will be available shortly on the Hemophilia Foundation website, www.hemophilia.org. Before the presentation begins, we would like to start with a few polling questions to get a better understanding of the people who are participating this evening. Our first question this evening: have you ever attended an inhibitor education summit? Yes or no? We'll give a few seconds for everyone to respond. Excellent. Thank you for your responses. We will go to our survey question number 2. Our question is, how many people have joined you for this evening's webinar? Your options are: no one has joined you this evening, you have a friend or two with you, you have 5 or 6 or more attending this webinar with you. Again, we'll pause a moment for your responses. Thank you, everyone, for responding. We'll move to our third question. How many people in your group have hemophilia and an inhibitor, either active or tolerized? Again, your options: no one in your group, 5 or 6 or more within your group. We'll pause for a few moments. Thank you, everyone, for your responses. And now our final survey this evening. How many in your group play a caregiver role? A few more seconds for everyone to respond. And 3, 2, 1, we will close out our survey. And again, we'll share the response with everyone. Well, thank you, everyone, for joining us in the survey questions this evening. And without further ado, it is now my pleasure to turn things over to Ed. Ed, welcome. The audience is all yours.
Good evening, everyone. This is Ed Kubler, and I am very happy to be on this session with you all. Thank you for joining us. As Annette mentioned, my name is Ed Kubler with Gulf States Hemophilia and Thrombophilia Treatment Center, and I'm located in Houston, Texas. I've been with the center for 17 years and actually got involved with bleeding disorders through summer camp. And that was my introduction to all of that. So I'd like to take you through this presentation, Learning to Let Go, Fostering Independence. And just to take a moment and go through the session overview, this session will explore the process of letting go from a patient perspective and a parent perspective. The process of letting go requires action and awareness from each person's perspective, and we'll see more through this session and these slides how you can get involved and how that will make more sense. It involves making changes physically, emotionally, and mentally, and that's really, really key. The key objective for this session is to discuss transitional issues facing adolescents with hemophilia with inhibitors and strategies for moving forward towards independent living. So I took a moment as I was putting this together and wanted to break down some of the areas that we'll look at during the slide presentation, starting with the question, why is it difficult to let go? And that's really the beginning of where we'll go this evening on the presentation. And I broke it into dealing with young adults, adolescents, young adults, and with parents, and tried to put in perspectives or some of the information where each group can reflect on that. So we'll look at independence versus dependence and spend a little time with that. And then we'll explore what success can look like and the results we want to aim for, which is really about setting goals and trying to move forward towards those goals. So if we look at having a bleeding disorder, and that's very familiar to everyone on the call, there's a lot of challenges involved, and I listed a few, and I am sure if you make a list, you'll have others to add to this. But it's really just taking a moment and looking at raising a child is difficult at best, and then overlaying that with a bleeding disorder. And some of the most difficult parts that I've heard as a social worker at our treatment center is the initial diagnosis, finding out that your child has a bleeding disorder. And from that moment, from that time, the ball starts rolling, and it's very overwhelming. There's a lot of feelings of helplessness. Families and parents often feel alone. The second piece that we hear is the involvement with the medical community that I don't think anyone understands at the beginning when a diagnosis happens in a family, everything that will mean medically going forward. And it includes hospitals and, of course, clinic visits, regular clinic visits, being able to have labs and draw blood, moving into infusing and self-infusing. And it just keeps going for parents and families and our patients. And as a social worker, I work a lot with parent education programs, and some of those questions involve the concerns and the difficulties with navigating school. And sports is a really popular piece for our young men. And, of course, they all want to play football, or at least a lot of them do. So parents sort of dread that question when it comes up, is how do we deal with that? What do we tell our kids? How do we help them navigate through sports? And then as the young men get older, and in bleeding disorders, if that's including any young women, who do we tell, and when do you tell your friends, and how do you share that intimate information with someone becomes one of those levels of trying to find your way through. And then last of all, dating, driving, and then the transition into college. So it's really 18 years or more of just navigating through letting go processes, transitioning, and at best, that's difficult. And then we find out that there's an inhibitor. And I do recall our very first patient that I worked with many years ago, and that was devastating. The diagnosis of having a bleeding disorder and then having an inhibitor. And I really saw that for this family, and I understand that to be very true for all of our families dealing with inhibitors. It is the game changer. It really puts our families and that patient in a whole different category. And I use the phrase that you become a subgroup of a subgroup. And by that I mean we already know that bleeding disorders is a small condition compared to some other medical conditions. And then when you become a subgroup of that, and I think the piece that really took me aback was when our families would sit down with me and just talk about the point of talking with other parents, and they don't understand what an inhibitor is. So our parents with children with an inhibitor are talking with parents who have children with a bleeding disorder, and the parents with a bleeding disorder have no idea what they're talking about and can't relate to some of the struggles and the things that have happened. So it really brought to light for me how it really is a game changer when you not only have a bleeding disorder diagnosis, but then on top of that, an inhibitor. So if we look at this, then that's really true. The idea that letting go is hard. It is. And by letting go, it's that process of transitioning. And specifically in adolescence and then moving into adulthood. And I do spend a lot of time working with leadership age young men from 15 to 26, 27 years old. And there is a process in there. And what's really, really important to understand is it happens on both sides. It happens with the parents, and it happens with the person with a bleeding disorder. So I'm going to move through some of that as we go through these slides. And I really want you to think about some of that for you, for those that are on the call, that process of letting go. And, of course, one of the first things we hear about and we begin to see, and I do as a professional in clinic, is the overprotecting of parents, not wanting anything to happen on their watch, not wanting anything to go wrong. So they not just protect their children as they would any of their children, but they actually overprotect because they already see things happening, and there's a lot of pain, and there's infusing and having to take medications and doctor's visits. And so you can see where it's really easy for parents to move into that role. And oftentimes it's the moms or the mothers. They do a lot of the caregiving to the patients. I wouldn't say that's 100%, but I work a lot with the mothers, and that often is either the role they take on in the family, or that's just the role that they have in trying to figure all this out for their child. And so for our adolescents, if you look at the other side of that, they spend their childhood and growing up being protected, and in many cases overprotected. So it's interesting when you start to look at both sides of that equation, because parents feel that is the right thing to do. I'm going to take care of my child. And the adolescents feel, well, I need to be taken care of. I have a medical condition, and so that process starts to happen on both sides. And then there gets to be a lot of attention given and a lot of focus on the person with the bleeding disorder. They're encouraged to be safe, a lot of times to not be as active as other children. And what happens is it just fosters that dependence. And parents tell their kids often, I know what's best for you. I don't want you to get hurt. I'm your parent, and my job is to take care of you. And they actually say it that way. It's my job to take care of you. So for parents, I put this slide just for you. And, we know that letting go is hard. That's I don't think anybody would really argue that. But I thought about this and have thought about it as I worked with some of our families, and it's really important to begin to recognize that not letting go is actually more difficult. That you step back for a moment as a parent and see your adolescent child or children or young adult, and if you look and start to compare them to other kids, which is what they're doing, they're comparing themselves with their peers, and they're not often prepared for the world. They're kept from some of those things because in that preparation they could get hurt, and that's a real thing. But it's also protection emotionally, not just physically. And so one of the effects of that is that they don't often feel confident, that their self-confidence hasn't had a chance to grow and strengthen because they're not allowed to do things or actually, feel they can't do things. And so part of self-confidence and self-esteem comes out of being capable. And so if we're not allowing our children or those children with bleeding disorders to feel capable, then they don't get the confidence. And then when we need them to, when they're getting ready to go out into the world and go to college or their first job or even at some point leaving home, they're not always really good at managing their bleeding disorder, especially if there's an inhibitor, which may require more treatment or more medical visits. So they're often not really good at managing that, and I see that in our clinic setting all the time. Is they don't really know how to order their medicine. They don't really know what kind they take, or if they know what kind they take, their parents still help them with it, and and so when we start to work with them with our questions about are you ready to be on your own from a treatment center perspective, there's sometimes a lag. There's sometimes a lag in them being ready. And when I push that further and say, what do you think is in the way? Well, I don't have to do it. My mom will do it or my dad will do it for me. So it's a lot easier. I can stay in bed and sleep and they will infuse me. And so, there's this dependency that happens that I'm sure as a teenager, anything to make life easier is probably a good thing. But that played out long term can actually cause more harm. And then the last point is that not making good decisions at a time that it's critical to do so. And I think what that ends up doing is feeding into the parents' fear of something's going to happen, because they understand that their children are growing, and there's a time when they need to release them more into the world, but they're not making the best decisions when they're out in the world. So it sort of feeds back into that loop, and then parents tend to hold on. So it was really that time when it gets so critical. So the answer, and I had a little fun with this, I hope you don't mind, I used the movie Frozen and took some of the lyrics and put them into the slide, and it was really just a fun way to remind parents, that a lot of times what happens is we can get frozen. We can actually not let go when everything in us wants our kids to grow and be independent and do all the things that we hope for them to do since they're small, but we sometimes get in the way of that, and it can actually do more harm. So something to think about for parents. What do you gain by overprotecting and controlling the decisions your adolescent or young adult need to be making? And really it's to take a moment and think about, because there are gains or we wouldn't do it. And I made a note of a couple of these, and I hope, if there's others you want to add, or when we do some more of the interacting or questions. But what I found out was that there's a sense of security. The parents feel safer about the decisions they're making, even if they're making decisions for their young adults. The parents themselves have a sense of security. And as I mentioned earlier, it's their job. A lot of times our parents will say, well, that's my job, that's my child. And I think there's a piece in there that's worth looking at. I spoke with some parents, and they would just say, believing that they were right, that no one else can do it better when it came to their child. And I think that's very powerful, because it speaks to a belief system and an experience. So breaking through that and trying to move to a place of greater independence has to push through this belief that parents are right, and that no one can do it better, including their own child. So it's really something to think about and see where does that get stuck if you're a parent in this session. And then basically the last one was, well, I'm protecting them. That's my job. I'm protecting my child, as you would hope all parents protect their kids. So for our young adults and our adolescents, same question to those of you that are on the call. Why is letting go hard? And this is for you. And some of the responses when I ask that question are it's easier letting someone do things for you. It's not worth fighting because you won't win. And the fight they were talking about was with their parents. And almost all of them will agree having a bleeding disorder isn't fun, and they don't really like dealing with it. And that process of learning to accept something is really individual for these kids and young men. It really each person has to find that place. And then some of them even say, I get a lot of attention, more than my siblings. So there's a little bit of competition, and it's real easy for them to have a bleeding disorder, and they do need more attention when there's a bleed, so they're actually getting that. And the question I would ask is for those young people, young adults and adolescents, is what do you need to do different? Because talking with your parents and talking about them letting go and not being so overprotective is one part of the equation, but the other part is what do you need to do different? And I just thought about this a little bit as I was writing the presentation, and it's pretty simple. It's really showing your parents that you can take care of yourself. You can take care of your bleeding disorder. You know how to order factor, and all the things that let them know that you can do this, that you've got this. And I think that is really one of the key concerns and pieces here is to really just take back control of that. And then I just wrote this, was just stop fighting with your parents. As an adolescent, there can be a lot of arguments about a lot of things, but around your bleeding disorder, and you've got this. So my point is to really just do it. Just do what it takes to take care of yourself. So then it comes down to dependence versus independence and really breaking it down. And I went to Webster's dictionary, and I knew there would be a pretty clear statement in there. And I actually thought it worked really well. And so dependence, one of the definitions was the state of relying on or being controlled by someone or something else. And then the next line to that was needing help. And I thought that was fair. If you think about depending on something or someone, that made a lot of sense. And then I looked up independence, and that piece said freedom from outside control or support. So clearly they're opposites in their statements, but it actually makes a lot of sense. And if we build from that and look at that, then it's something maybe that we can work towards and possibly change. So as the young person, the young adult, or the adolescent who's in this session or will be hearing this session, my question to you is, given the choice to be dependent, which we read in the last slide, being controlled, or to be independent and not be controlled, what would you choose? And it sounds like an easy question, but what's tagged into that is also all the things that I was just talking about with stepping up and taking responsibility and showing you can manage things. So there's a lot of battles, I think, in our teenage years and with parents at that time, and a lot of it's about wanting to grow up. Excuse me. And a lot of it is about being independent, yet a lot of the behavior and some of the actions around that in adolescent time and even young adults is not being ready to or not proving you can. So just something to think about. Given the choice, what would you choose? Then to our parents, the same question, just turned around a little bit. Given the choice for your child to grow up and be dependent, unable to make their own decisions, controlled, or independent, able to make their own decisions, what would you choose? And they seem pretty simple when you read them out in a little sentence. I mean, almost anybody would pick, the parent would say, well, of course I want them to be independent. But that's where it starts to get hard. And that slide we just showed is, why is it so hard? Why is letting go hard? So we'll break that down a little bit and take some time with that in the next couple of slides. So being independent, with independence comes responsibility. It's a word that we use a lot, but it holds a lot of impact. What does it mean to be responsible in having a bleeding disorder or a bleeding disorder with an inhibitor? So to start with, I just listed five things here, and they're pretty simple, but I also see it's where adolescents or young adults start to trip themselves up. Get arguments about homework and getting things done and learning to drive and curfews and then not coming home on time, or just things that parents sort of, I think, in a way begin to test their young adults and their adolescents to see if they're going to comply with house rules and some of the things that they have in place, and there's often that's what gets pushed back. So it begins to set up this confusion about, yes, I want to be independent, but I'm not yet taking on the responsibility to show that I'm capable of being independent. Making good choices and choosing friends, that's a big one for parents. They're looking to see the kinds of choices that their adolescents and even young adults are making. And with today and internet and social media, it really gets a lot trickier. So making good choices with that, and then just basically showing you're capable, that they know when you're not home that you're okay, that you're safe, and you're taking care of yourself. So that's really how it begins, and those are some of the pretty easy ones. The thing that is a little bit tricky is that this is a different skill set than maybe our young people are used to, because the plan is for them to be on their own, which is that moment when it gets scary and where parents start to feel a little bit overwhelmed and they're not ready and they need my help. And so it's really learning some of the pieces to that, the skill set of planning ahead, the skill set of being prepared, and not always having to chase something or always running late or those kinds of things that can happen in life, but when they happen all the time, and then we have to sort of, backpedal or have excuses for why things didn't happen, it starts to unravel that idea of I can do this on my own. And the last is that piece I talked about with feeling confident. Confidence is a way you feel inside, and so it comes out not like an ego. It comes out in the way you behave, and it comes out in the way you speak and how you address people and things. So confidence is something that comes through you and comes out of you. So you can't really fake that too much. It really, I think people who sort of try to fake confidence, it's more about blowing up their ego to have it look more solid than it is. And so for parents, this is your job, back to having a job. If you're going to have a job and be involved in independence and raising your children and your adolescents and into young adulthood, then the time is while they're home. That's where they learn the lessons, because the rules and all of those pieces change when they get to out into the world. That begins to take on a whole nother set of rules. And we've seen a lot of young people get in trouble with the law because they didn't really have some good either role modeling or didn't have enough boundaries when they were home. So both parties have to let go of something, and that's the way you achieve the ultimate plan. So I said it, I wrote it here, say it with me, and I can't hear you, but I know you're yelling this right now: independence. So the other piece is just knowing hemophilia-related knowledge. Know about your medical condition. What are the important things you need to know? And I made a list here, and you may have some others. And it's really just have the basics. And I think our young adults and our adolescents, I know, are learning that either when they go to camp or when they go to clinic, and parents are teaching this about how to manage all of this. But it's really one way to show that you can handle this as a young person, that you've got these things in place and your parents don't have to worry about you. I just named a couple of other things. Know how to reach your treatment center. I'm amazed at how many young people don't know the phone number, or even, they may know the name of their nurse. That's pretty simple, but if you need that information, if you need that number, it should be in their phone, because everything else is in there. So probably their HTC or hematologist. Using good judgment when you're evaluating risk of a bleed, and that'll go along with activities and things you do outside of the home more than anything. And just to, this as a social worker, being aware that healthcare is not free. I spend a lot of time helping our patients get health care, even before the Affordable Care Act, helping them get health care, and when they didn't qualify or there wasn't anything available, trying to do that. So having medical coverage, and that our young people realize that's really important when they get out into the world. And then, of course, at our center, we push medical alert bracelets. Our doctors and our staff, that's a big thing for us. So if you look at thinking outside the box, which is critical thinking, and it goes along with growing up and sort of becoming into our own and taking responsibility, and I listed a couple things in blue here, and that's just being prepared, and I mentioned that earlier. And what that does is it actually allows peace of mind, and it actually helps with having a sense of I have a handle on this. And that goes a long way. And the second thing, and I teach this a lot with our young people at camp and leadership groups, is have a plan B for everything, even if the plan is just in your head. Because that's where, if this doesn't happen and whatever this is that we've invested in, if that doesn't work out, then whatever you come up with as the next thing you can try is your plan B. And that's always good to have in your back pocket. As a parent, I'm not going to take a lot of time, but I put this in here, is to just take a moment as you're listening to some of this information and reading the slides, and you'll hear from our panelists in a few minutes, but to just kind of take a moment and think about what you need to be, so you can be sufficient and confident so your child can be on their own. What do they need? Sorry, I read that incorrectly. What do they need so they can be on their own from you? That's really the question. And as you take a moment, the other part of that is in that same thought, what do you need to let go of so their independence has the greatest success? And what I hope happens afterwards, after this session and at some point not too far in the future, is that you start having conversations about that maybe some of this information just brings up some thoughts and some ideas about that process of letting go from both sides. And then for the young person, same thing. I just sort of want you to take a moment and think about what you need from your parents to feel self-sufficient. Are you getting that from them? And then what do you need to let go so you can take those steps forward? Because if both are happening, then the success of independence and the success of stepping up and being more responsible will occur. And then to, again, talk with your parents, bring it up to them about things that they can do and you can do as well. So change is hard. We've kind of talked about letting go is hard. Well, change is hard, but change happens all the time. It's inevitable. It's really part of life. And it causes a lot of people to feel afraid and uncertain, and they don't really like not knowing what's coming. So part of this in this particular session is just to take a moment, and in the context of letting go, is know that the change of them growing is happening right in front of you, and that your job is to help them transition as a parent, and to do that with the very best you can. And sometimes it's just taking a breath and not screaming, but just letting them have their moment, have their life, and begin to own some of that. And the last piece was just, to really not try to take some of the choices away. When they can make their own choice, that is where they begin to feel confident. And as a young person, just stepping up and taking some of the responsibility, it's as simple as saying to your parents, I've got this, I can do this, or please let me do this. Thank you for helping me, but I can do this. And that goes a long way. And I think it starts to help parents understand you are capable. And that changing from a dependent teenager to a responsible young adult is challenging, but it is important. So the thought I had at the end of that whole slide was the rewards are great and worth all the hard work, which is often how most things are in life. If you think about anything you've done that's been difficult. So just to sum it up, I'm getting close to ending the slide presentation piece. Letting go is hard, but we've already talked about that it is necessary for fostering independence. And hopefully from the presentation, everyone's believing that independence is the way to go, is the steps to take towards. Inhibitors present their own set of challenges, so it's just stepping up to those as they show up, and again with the same skill base of letting go. To not be frozen, to not get stuck, to not hold on so tight that there's no mobility, because then no one really wins when that happens. And so being independent requires the commitment to take responsibility, and that's to the young people, the adolescents and young adults. And one of the first things, and I took a moment to talk about knowing your medical condition, and the last piece of that is really just having a plan B. It's really just simple. It's the next thing you'd do if something didn't work out. So in closing, this is your life. You guys that are adolescent and young adults, so own it. I mean, take responsibility for it. It is yours. And to parents, just one more time, really nicely, is just to let them have that. So that's the end of the slide part, and I wanted to open it up to our panel and just see if there was anything from the slides or anything they wanted to add to that piece. I also have some questions to sort of kick off the discussion to our panelists, and I think you'll hear some really good information and hear the personal story and the personal perspective. So if there isn't any general comments or any additions to the slide presentation from the panel, at least at this point, then I can go ahead and ask the first question to Khalik. So Khalik, from your point of view as a teenager, and I understand you're almost 15 years old, what's important for you to do to let go of being dependent as you're looking ahead towards college and at some point leaving home?
Well, I mean, looking towards college, I'm obviously going to have to start talking more to my HTC, and more independently medically, with ordering my own factor and diagnosing, myself, less dependent on my parents.
Yeah,
but,
excellent. Yeah.
Besides that, I mean, my parents, they're not too they're protective. I mean, they're not too overprotective. They let me, be myself, and they don't completely inhibit what I can do.
Great. Is there anything more from them, like if you had a conversation with them, say after this session or this week, that you would like to see them even help you more with the next step of being almost 15? Is there anything, or do you feel like that's pretty much in a good place, or is there something else?
I mean, I feel like I would like if they just could walk me through the steps of contacting the doctor and setting things up, for me to be able to do it myself.
Great. Excellent. Yeah. Cool. So I have a question for Karen, who's a mom, a parent. As a parent, what's the most difficult piece of letting go of your son as he was growing up? And I know he's in his early 20s, but sort of reflecting back on that.
I think the most difficult time was probably getting the driver's license and getting in a car and driving away from me.
Mm-hmm.
Being the first time that you're not always with them, that they're with somebody else. It's a really weird feeling to have them get in the car and you're not in control of what's happening anymore. Right.
And so taking that a little bit further, how did you do it? I mean, what was the process for you other than standing there with tears in your eyes maybe, or just, holding your breath? But how did you move through that so it became, not so scary every time?
Holding your breath is right. But my husband and I both, we respected Michael and trusted him. And it goes back to that one slide you were talking about, good choices and good friends. And Michael always had really good supportive friends, and we knew that the decisions he made were good ones. And so you just have to trust that what you've instilled in them up until that point is the choices that they're going to make. And you just hope they're the ones that you want them to make.
Yes. And here's a question for Jorge, already a young adult. Can you tell us about your journey towards becoming more independent? And in other words, just some of the things, the steps you took, or the experiences you had that really helped you, get there?
Well, I just remember when I was a kid, I remember I was about 10 or 11. My mom told us that she was done pretty much infusing us, and we had to do it on our own. So we started going to camp when we were 7. So they taught us how to infuse. They taught us how to mix our factor and stuff. So we learned how to do it on our own. When I was 16, I left home. I left home back in Mexico, and I came to the U.S. And after all these years, I still sometimes ask my mom questions on, hey, can you help me with this? But at the same time, we luckily, the way my mom raised us and taught us how to do all this stuff really helped us a lot and got us to where we are now.
Yeah. Are there some challenges that you still face today at your age in becoming independent and more responsible? There's still challenges that you could talk about.
Well, there's still challenges. Like now that I'm away from home and stuff, usually, it's when I was living with my parents, I didn't have to worry about bills, rent, or anything like that. Now that I'm
right.
Now that I'm on my own, I have to. I looked for a job, got my license and stuff now. It's still a challenge sometimes, having to worry about going to school and working and, how am I going to pay for this and stuff. So that's when usually luckily my parents are there to help me out.
Great. Thank you. Excellent. Khalik, I have another question for you. What additional hemophilia-specific challenges have you experienced as you're becoming more independent? So what particular things can you name or list?
I mean, in general, in school, I mean, things like sports, have been a little bit harder. Like, I don't actually do sports, but I mean, I could. It would just be harder, I had to infuse more often and be careful, and it's a lot more work versus someone without hemophilia.
Yes, and do you? I'm sorry, were you gonna go ahead?
I was just gonna say, like becoming independent, it is harder with hemophilia because it makes you more responsible and makes you look more
right
at what you're doing. Look at from the outside and think like, could this like get me hurt, or like how could this be a bad idea more than some of your friends might be thinking.
Exactly. Yeah, and that's that moment I think that all of us, treatment center staff, parents, that you're actually looking at things that way is one of those steps of responsibility, because it is one of the fears. What about, do you still, with your parents, do you see the struggles, or do they still struggle with giving you some of that? Are you able to are you in tune with any of that, or is it pretty smooth?
What do you mean in tune with?
With your parents, your mom or your dad, your parents struggle, and them allowing you to do some things.
I mean, yeah, I see. Like when if I ask to do something that they don't want me to do, or find it could be dangerous, they're still going to be hesitant about it.
Yeah.
And I see that, but sometimes I can handle myself. Sometimes I'm dumb, but most of the time I can handle myself with what I'm doing.
Great. Yeah. Another one for Karen. As a parent, where do you think the need to be overprotective comes from specifically for you? Can you speak to that?
It's pretty easy. You think about typical childhood injuries. Your son goes out and gets hit in the eye and gets a black eye, and normally that would be no big deal. For your child with hemophilia, it can be a huge deal. So it's dealing with those everyday things that are not typical for your son with hemophilia, especially with an inhibitor. And you also know that injury is going to lead to pain.
Right.
Which for most kids, it may or may not. but you're looking at an infusion, you're looking at pain and swelling. And I think being overprotective is just not wanting that to happen for them.
Yes. And would you, looking back, would you do anything different?
Absolutely not. I think when we look at Michael now and how independent, and, he's soon to graduate from a university and actually writing books about children with hemophilia, no. I think I must have done something right.
Great. That's a great feeling. Yeah. Another question, Jorge. What are some of the steps you took and experience that you had that helped you get to where you are now? Can you talk about some of the actual steps you took for somebody else, maybe a little bit behind you, who might be looking at what are the steps ahead?
What are the steps ahead? Can you repeat that? Sorry.
Sure. What are can you talk specifically to some of the steps that you actually took to get to where you are in your independence, and maybe some of the things that helped you get there?
Yeah. Well, the very first thing I learned was to infuse. I learned to infuse. So, if I traveled or if I was at work and I got injured, I knew how to infuse and I knew what to do, to get better. Another thing I did also that my parents taught me how to do, I learned how to work at a young age. I learned how to save money. I learned I've always been pretty good at school and stuff. So that helped a lot. And they also taught me how to be smart in control, be smart on how you spend and what things you do when, if you're going to do something that it's going to hurt you, think twice about it before doing it.
Right.
Yeah.
Excellent. And then just a last question for the panel in general and anyone who wants to answer. In one of the slides, I talked about needing a different skill set, looking at the process of independence as actually skills. What skills do you think that you had to acquire that actually assisted you in your either independence process or fostering independence in your child?
I think teaching your child to self-infuse is probably one of the most important things. I remember once that happened, as a parent, you feel so much better because you don't have to be there to help them do that. So that's very important.
Great. Anyone else? Okay, so those were my questions to sort of kick things off. I don't know if anyone listening to the session has any questions to the panelists or anything specific, or maybe triggered some thoughts that you want to share while we're all together. And I'll turn that back to Annette to help us with that piece.
Excellent. Thank you, Ed. Ladies and gentlemen, to ask a question via the web presentation, select the chat pod located in the lower left corner of your screen, then type and send your question. If you would like to ask a question live via your phone, please press star 1 on your telephone keypad. I will announce each caller prior to bringing you into the conference. Please remember, if you have your phone on mute, take it off mute when you are selected to ask your question. Once again, to ask a question via the web presentation, select the chat pod located in the lower left corner of your screen. Type and send your question. Pause a moment. Well, thank you, everyone. Ed, we have no questions at this time, so thank you.
Okay, great. Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Ed. Your feedback is critical to us, not only in measuring the efficiency of this webinar, but also in the planning of future inhibitor-related activities. Please complete this 5-minute survey appearing on your screen now by clicking on the link. And lastly, a quick reminder to join us on Wednesday, May 13th at 8 p.m. Eastern for our next webinar, Is Hemophilia A Secret? Disclosure on the 21st Century. Thank you for attending. This concludes the program.